Hello, listeners. This is Kat, and welcome back to Put Your Hands Up Podfics. This will be the continuation of State of Mind. This will be Part 43, Chapter 26, entitled Dark Matter. The first time Yuki had laid eyes on Inko, he'd immediately known that there was something different about her, something special. Most people that came to his offices were young and excited, recent high school graduates looking to get into the support business, full of reckless energy. But not Inko. There was just something about her that screamed sadness and desperation. She was like him. She was a kind woman. He learned immediately during the interview. She was shy at first, but Yuki went out of his way to make her comfortable. She opened up, like a rose, and he saw the connections that made her, her. He hired her as his receptionist on the spot, and he saw his first glimpse of her beautiful smile. Yuki watched their string in divine creation, forming from nothing between the two of them, weak and uncertain in the beginning, but strengthening more and more. Their first date ended in tears for both of them. They were both hurt messes as they described their histories. But their string was building up, becoming better. Dates afterward went a lot better, and gradually they fell in soft love, both of them cautious at first, both of them hurt from previous relationships. But soon they accepted it, moving in together, inhabiting each other's spaces. Together. There was no big proposal like with most couples. They were at the park that day, the location of their first date. The sun was bright above them and Inko's hair was down, green waves cascading across her shoulders, shiny under the sun. She'd been laughing at some stupid joke Yuki had said about the birds trying to steal their homemade sandwiches. Yuki had leaned over, brushing her hair behind her ear, as she looked away from the birds and up at him in confusion, eyes bright with happiness. "Marry me," he said quietly, suddenly, and then watched as her entire face went red. "Marry you?" she squeaked. He nodded, leaning back, giving up and letting the birds have his sandwich. "Yeah," he answered, lifting a hand to gently touch their string. It was heavy, thick, more like a rope than a string, and it was a nice russet color, like the color of the sky right before the sun went down on a clear night. "I want to be with you forever," he said, smiling. "Me too," she answered after a moment, adoration in her eyes. "Let's get married." Those words echoed in Yuki's mind as he woke up in the hospital. There was no one in the room for him, no one to calm him down as his rage grew and grew, his eyes flashing. Yuki didn't get mad often, but when he did, it was a calm fury, like the surface of the ocean, a storm brewing beneath. Yuki was pissed. He wasn't losing her. He wasn't losing anyone else. Izuku had once, when he was much younger, made a list of all the things that scared him, in an attempt to overcome or avoid them. At the time, his father had been at the top of the long list, right above fire. The list had been long, spanning the length of several pages, even with his small, cramped handwriting. But now, many years later, that list was shorter, and Izuku wasn't as scared of everything anymore. He realized, distantly, that the thought of facing his father did not frighten him as much as he thought it would have. He wanted it. He wanted to show that monster exactly why pissing him off was a bad idea. Izuku didn't release Shoto's hand the entire way to the police station, gripping it as if it was the only thing holding him together. Maybe it was. He'd calmed down significantly, but he hadn't spoken since the breakdown in his bedroom, and Shoto was growing more and more concerned. There was a spark in his eyes that Shoto had never seen before. A light that promised pain for anyone that dared get in his way. It made goosebumps rise along Shoto's skin. There was an emergency meeting getting ready to take place despite it being nighttime, and there were a lot of people already there when they arrived to the police station. Aizawa and Mike walked in on either side of Shoto and Izuku, guiding them to a conference room. All Might was also taking part in the mission, despite being retired, more so as volunteer work apparently. For Izuku, of course. Once inside, All Might, in his powered-down form, swimming in his hero costume, practically ran forward, pulling Izuku into a hug. He still didn't release Shoto's hand, his other arm lifting to squeeze All Might back. "We'll get her back, my boy," All Might reassured, leaning back as Aizawa and Mike left them, walking toward Tsukauchi. "I know," Izuku answered flatly. "We'll get her back, and I'm going to kill him." Shoto looked at Izuku in surprise, while All Might grimaced. "Izuku." Izuku shook his head, and Shoto felt his grip clench his hand almost painfully. "He will never have the chance to hurt anyone again." Shoto squeezed Izuku's hand back as All Might only sighed, patting Izuku's shoulder, and turning around as Tsukauchi called for everyone's attention. There were so many people there. All Might, Eraserhead, Present Mike, Itto, Sansa. "Let's get started. Itto, can you recount the events from your point of view, please?" Tsukauchi asked from the front of the room. Izuku looked across the table at his mother's fiancé, the man's arms covered in bandages, his aura no longer that calm shade of blue and green. Now it was the pure crimson of burning rage, barely held in check. So a lot like Izuku's. Good. "We were walking home from a date," Itto began, hands clenched over the top of the table. Blood-red hair down and falling in front of his face. "Neither of us saw them coming. I was hit on the back of the head, and when I came to, only a few seconds had passed, I think. A man had his arms around Inko, and she looked." The man winced, forehead creasing as he lifted a hand to push up his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose between fingers. He shook his head to clear it and sighed, his gold-rimmed glasses falling back down. "One of them knocked me back out and took her, and I woke up in the hospital with these burns." He lifted his arms before dropping them, squaring his shoulders. "It doesn't matter, but what does matter is that I can get you to her. For everyone else in the room that doesn't know, please state what your quirk is," Tsukauchi requested, sitting down at the table, pulling a pile of papers toward himself. Itto nodded. "Between almost everyone that I've ever met, there is a connection. Between things as well, but that's beside the point for now. For people I have an emotional connection to, the link is stronger. I see these connections as strings, or in some cases ropes. Their color varies depending on the person, but I can use these strings to locate people and things. The string..." The red-haired man halted, chest hitching as his eyes closed, expression pained. "The strings no longer remain if the person dies. That's how I know she's still alive." Izuku frowned. There was definitely history there, and from the sound of it, pain. It was an amazing quirk, but he could see it causing a lot of hurt. "I tracked the string I share with Inko." Itto sighed. "The location does not match the one Yamazawa provided." Izuku lifted his head, meeting Itto's crimson eyes. Their light described a perfect storm beneath the surface, and Izuku nodded. He felt the same. Tsukauchi cleared his throat, gathering the attention back to him. "Before we move on to plans, I want to make one thing clear." He looked down the table at Izuku, seated between Shoto and Toshinori. "Yamazawa, you are not to go anywhere alone. We are aware of the message from Midoriya telling you to go to this location on your own. Under no circumstances are you to do so. Izuku gritted his teeth, eyes narrowing. I know. He wasn't an idiot. He'd give the heroes a chance. Tsukauchi nodded. Good. Now, we have another person here to speak on the line. The detective clicked a button on a small remote that had been sitting on the table, and on the wall-length white screen behind him, an image popped up of a man in a blue dress shirt with spiky black hair and large gray eyes. This is Agent Davidson from the FBI. We have reason to believe that Midoriya was the leader of a group of villains in America. Can you see us okay, Detective? Tsukauchi explained and then asked. Hello! The voice answered in English before moving on to broken but clear Japanese. I can see you well. I see children present, Detective. The images I will show are graphic. Tsukauchi glanced at the two of them, and Izuku spoke up. We're fine. We need to be here. They're heroes in training, and they both have their provisional license, Toshinori explained from Izuku's side. All Might! The man exclaimed excitedly, the name sounding weird in an American accent. Long time no see, eh? Heard about your retirement. Glad to see you're finally settling down. All Might smiled awkwardly, rubbing the back of his neck. Yeah. Tsukauchi cleared his throat once again, and Izuku was beginning to wonder if the man was getting a cold. If we could move on, please. We're under a time constraint. Yes, of course. Apologies. It's not often I get to work with you guys. Please excuse my enthusiasm. I understand this is very serious. The man peered in closer to the camera, and Izuku could hear the sound of clicking, as if he was moving files around. And then a photo appeared on the side of the screen. Detective Davidson's face, squishing to take up only half the screen. This was the first case we believed to be Akuma's doing. Izuku blinked before interrupting, voice incredulous. Excuse me, Akuma? Ah, yeah. The American leaned away bashfully. Sorry about the name. The media here caught wind of him quickly, and they knew he was Japanese and that he was like a hell demon, so Americans aren't the most creative bunch. From his side, All Might snorted, stifling a laugh behind his hand. Izuku leaned back down with a frown, unsure how he felt about his father having a villain name at all, let alone that it was just demon. The photo on the screen was of a gruesome slaughter, blood splattered across walls, the bodies barely even identifiable as something that was once human life. They were just burnt corpses, two people, cowering against a wall. The blood must have meant that they'd been hurt before they'd been burnt, torture on top of torture, and then merciless death. Izuku's father had done that. More pictures were shown, more people talked, but Izuku had fallen into himself, that image frozen in his mind. Eventually, Izuku was taken away, Shoto sitting him down in a spare room and crouching in front of him, holding both of his hands. Izuku blinked at him, squinting his eyes and trying to be present. Shoto's mouth was moving, but Izuku couldn't hear him through the haze shrouding his brain. He tried to force himself to hear, but it didn't work, and it was so frustrating. Shoto ended up climbing onto the chair with him, pulling him against his side and letting him stay there until the dissociation eased away, and Izuku breathed a sigh of relief, reaching his fists up to rub harshly at his eyes. Is this too much for you? Shoto asked, not rudely, his voice gentle. He was worried, Izuku could tell, but the words were still hurtful. I can handle it, Izuku answered, swallowing. I don't know. Shoto nodded, running a hand through his hair. It's a lot, that's for sure. What? I didn't even... Izuku groaned, pressing a hand to his face, unable to form coherent sentences. His mind a chaotic mess of anger and confusion and worry. He didn't know how he was supposed to feel in this situation. Deep down, he'd always known his father was a villain, at least in a domestic capacity. But to see those images right in front of him, to have another country describing him as a demon, to know that his own flesh and blood had killed people, slaughtered them like they were nothing. Izuku was having trouble wrapping his head around it, even after everything he'd been through, that his own biological father would ruthlessly kill people just... These were lives. These people had stories and family and friends, and he took that away from all of them. It was different when he'd hurt Izuku. But now that there were other people involved, other people hurting, dying. Hey, Izuku. Shoto caught Izuku's chin, lifting his head up to look at him. You're bleeding. Izuku blinked with a frown, looking down at his fingers. Apparently he'd been chewing the nails or picking at them or something. He couldn't even remember. He could only see that his only remaining index finger was bleeding, rivulets of crimson carving a path down his finger to pull at his knuckle. He looked at the drop for a moment, the way the light reflected off it. He'd thought he was past this. Shoto climbed off the chair and grabbed a pile of napkins from the empty conference table, wrapping his finger in one of them after settling back in next to him. They were in a smaller, empty conference room. The chair beneath them was plush and soft, if not old. The light was too bright, and Izuku's head hurt. He was tired, his eyes heavy, and he was reminded of the fact that none of them had slept in a long time, since the night before Izuku had received the message. Hey, Izuku, talk to me. I can tell you're thinking too hard. Shoto's voice sounded off, and Izuku realized that he was really worried about him. Why did that make his chest hurt? Izuku shuddered, squeezing his hands into fists against the fabric over his heart. I'm a mess, he muttered. I'm sorry. Shoto sighed, arms lifting to wrap around him. Izuku turned to bury his face into his boyfriend's chest, that usual thrill that accompanied thinking the word boyfriend not present, only an uncomfortably hollow feeling in his chest. Shoto was comfortable, though, cold on one side and hot on the other, enough to get him out of his mind and think about the differing temperatures pressing against him on either side of his body. I know this is difficult, Shoto began as Izuku pushed his face into his neck. But I am here for you. You can talk to me about it, or just hug me. Izuku chuckled tearily, his own arms encircling Shoto. Thank you. You're welcome, Izuku, he answered, burying his nose in the top of Izuku's hair. Shoto was the one to find them, the briefing ending, and he immediately went after his kid. He entered the room to see Izuku and Todoroki, a mess of limbs in a chair entirely too small to fit both of their bodies. He sighed heavily, arms crossing over his chest as he leaned against the door jamb. Todoroki looking over at him, but Izuku unmoving. As soon as he'd seen the message, he'd known this would be a disaster for the kid. Izuku had finally begun feeling better. Things had been going well. Shota had watched him progress from having nightmares every night so bad that Shota had to use erasure on him, to nightmares only a couple times a week, and only sometimes having to use his quirk on him. Shota was beginning to realize that Izuku would never get the chance to be a kid. Horrible things always happened to him, and Shota felt like a failure for not being able to protect him from it. Is he asleep? He finally asked, walking forward to pull a chair out of the table, sitting at it backward and resting his arms across the backrest. No, Izuku answered, voice muffled. Todoroki met Shota's eyes, concern filling them, and Shota was suddenly glad that Izuku had the boy. We'd like to keep your phone with us, in case he texts you again, Shota said carefully, watching as his kid's hand visibly tightened against Todoroki. And we've decided we don't want you to take part in the rescue." That got a reaction. Izuku sitting straight up, almost knocking heads with Todoroki. "You're not leaving me out of this. That's my mom." Shota narrowed his eyes. "We know, kid, but you've been through so much already. And this villain already has a high kill count. He's unpredictable. It's only thanks to Itto that we even know your mother is still alive. We're not putting you in even more danger. You just got out of a coma, Izuku." Todoroki was nodding, but Izuku shook his head, hands forming into fists, and Shota noticed that his left hand was wrapped in a napkin, blood speckling it. He must have been chewing his nails, and Shota's decision was cemented even farther. It would benefit no one to let Izuku take part in this. "I can't just sit around while everyone else deals with my problems. It's my mom, and he's my father." "No." Izuku startled when Shota interrupted, and he forced himself to even his tone. "That villain is not your father, Izuku, and they are not just your problems. Look around, kid. Do you realize how many heroes are here for you? And not just for you either. This is our job. We can handle it. Please, let us do what we're paid to do." Izuku worked his jaw, brows drawn together. Shota would have paid good money then to have a mind-reading quirk. He needed his kid to stay safe. He couldn't see it again. He couldn't watch as his child died. He was still having nightmares of Izuku dropping to the ground like a rag doll, of rolling him over to see bone-white skin, eyes crying rivers of blood, of Izuku seizing across his legs while Shota could do nothing but hold him. He couldn't do that again. His heart ached at the mere thought of that day. Izuku was too young, too inexperienced, and too immature to be put in situations where he felt his only option was to nearly kill himself. Especially after he had gotten that new quirk that literally reduced his lifespan. Izuku finally nodded, and Shota relaxed before the kid spoke again. "Please, promise to ask for my help if you need me, or my quirks." Shota blinked, glancing at Todoroki. "Izuku told me everything," Todoroki explained, and Shota raised a brow before looking back to Izuku. "Of course I told him," Izuku said, lacing his hand in Todoroki's. "Well, anyway, I promise to let you know if we need your help," Shota answered, standing up. "Now, in the meantime, you two should head back to the dorms. We've increased security around all of UA as well, just in case you're a target too." "He won't try to get into UA," Izuku said ominously, and both Todoroki and Shota glanced at him in surprise. "How do you know that?" Shota asked carefully from where he'd stood up from his chair. Izuku frowned, blinking up at him before shrugging, climbing away from Todoroki and off the chair. His father would consider it beneath him to have to come retrieve Izuku. He would always make Izuku come to him, and Izuku always had. He'd never had a choice. "I just know," he answered instead. Izuku wouldn't say it, but in reality this wasn't the first time Hisashi had attempted to use his mother to get to him. He hadn't always been the only one living in that apartment, and he hadn't been the only one hurt by that man. Hisashi knew Izuku couldn't stand by while someone else was hurt, especially when he felt like it was his fault. He remembered one night, Izuku had talked back to Hisashi. The man had thrown a glass cup at Izuku and he dodged, it shattering against the cabinet behind him. He'd been told to clean it up, but he'd responded with a simple, concise, "No." Hisashi had been mad. Izuku had run, terrified, hiding under his bed. But he'd never been able to hide for long when Hisashi would go find his mother, threatening to kill her unless Izuku was a good boy and came out. Izuku was only just now realizing how horrible everything he'd gone through was. All right, listeners, this concludes the first half to Chapter 26 of State of Mind. The second half to this chapter will be up next. Personally, I think the author's doing a really nice job with consistent themes throughout this fic. Since the beginning, we've seen Izuku consistently putting himself in harm's way, throwing his life on the line, and the people around him trying to get him to a place where he can trust and be willing to let adults, right? The responsible adults step in. But Izuku has a history of being let down by adults, and so putting his faith in the heroes at this point, being willing to trust Aizawa, even in this moment, is a huge deal, I think, in how the author's been putting this together, right? And how trauma and our past experiences can have an impact on the way we see the world. And to Izuku, up until now, he has consistently put himself in harm's way. So I think it's really nice to see what the author's been putting together here. Characterization-wise, I think it's been great. There's been a lot of realistic components, too, to how trauma works and the impact of that on relationships. So I just would love to hear any comments or thoughts you're having, right? Any reactions you've had so far to this fic, especially as we're getting to the end here, right? We've just got a couple chapters left before things wrap up. So drop your comments below for me. Let me know what you were thinking. Just as a reminder, of course, the fic is located on AO3, so you can always slide over leaving comments, kudos, and support to the original author as well. I'm sure it's much appreciated. And as always, thank you all so much for listening.